All right, welcome. I'm just going to leave it for a minute and let everybody trickle in, and then we can get started. So welcome to Plugged In, day 3. We've got our 9 a.m. session PST with Brady Josephson, but again, I'll just give everybody a couple extra minutes to trickle in. Okay, maybe about 10 extra seconds, and then we'll get started. Okay, good morning and afternoon, everyone. We're super excited to have you all participating in what is the final day of Keela's 3-day virtual conference called Plugged In. But before we begin this session, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. So first, this session will be about an hour in length, maybe a little bit longer, including about a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session at the end. We do encourage you to ask questions throughout the session and then just pop them in either the Q&A box or the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. All of these sessions are being recorded, so you will receive, along with the slide deck, the video at the end of the week. And with that, I'd like to introduce and extend a huge warm welcome to an amazing speaker, Brady Josephson. Brady is a managing director of the Nextafter Institute of Online Fundraising, a self-professed charity nerd, entrepreneur, digital marketer, professor, and writer. We're very lucky to have him here presenting this session on the online fundraising strategies of 2020. So with that, I'd like to welcome Brady, and I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm just going to share my slides here. So a few words of warning here as we talk about online fundraising strategies in 2020. One, I think I'm starting to go a little loopy, having not, left my house or gotten in a car or just losing routine. So I'm feeling a little loose, a little loopy. So we'll see where this goes. But also warning, there is a lot that I'm going to go through here. So get your pencils ready. I'm going to go through a lot of content. I was telling Sam, I've been trying to cut this down to make sure we have tons of time for questions, and I don't know what to cut. So there's going to be a lot. I will move quick. You will get the slides. Please jot down questions. Please jot down ideas as we go. I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about COVID-19 and responses. A lot of other people are talking about that, but one of the best things that I've seen that I did want to highlight is this open letter from the folks at Heartsook. And the summary is basically this: keep working, keep cultivating, keep thinking, keep asking, keep communicating. I think there could be a temptation to kind of be paralyzed and we don't know what to do and stop. And there's some wisdom in pausing and getting information, but paralysis or stopping, I think, is one of the biggest risks that we have when it comes to fundraising in particular. So of course, change message, of course, change some tactics, but don't stop. We need to keep working, keep thinking, keep cultivating, keep asking, keep communicating. All right, so these ideas that I'm going to go through today, where do they come from? Here's just a little bit of where we're coming from, or where I'm coming from in our approach. So we're a fundraising research lab based in Texas, even though I'm up in Vancouver. I'm actually in the process of moving to Texas. We may have bought a house in the last week, on FaceTime, which is super crazy. It's an interesting experience. But what we try to do is kind of triangulate different types of research. So forensic research, applied research, and academic research to kind of formulate these ideas and strategies. So it's based on something that's more substantial than just, oh, I like, or oh, I think. So for example, the forensic research studies that we do, we actually become a donor or a subscriber ourselves. So I was telling Sam, tomorrow, our team and myself, we have to make 120 online donations for a multi-channel study that we're doing. So we make these donations with different personas, or we sign up for emails, or we contact charities and ask them questions, and we capture the response. So last year we did a study where we gave 203 donations to nonprofits online, and we answered 27 questions while we gave, and looked at the thank you page and looked at 5 different questions. And doing this allows us to do a few things. One, we get to capture data points like this, were organizations using incentives? So these kind of additional reasons to give, like matching or quantifiable impact. And we found that only 36% of organizations were using something like that on their donation page. So we accumulate some data, which is interesting, but then we also get ideas or interesting things like this. We saw this organization that had this, most people are giving $75. And you can see that another organization that we were making donations also used the same strategy. So then we're like, oh, that's interesting. These are pretty large organizations in the US, and saying they may know what they're doing. That's kind of interesting. And you can see how they default and pre-select the amount that they mention in that kind of social proof nudge copy. And then they also have this little arrow nudge over here to monthly. So we can collect these interesting ideas and see what's going on. And we're really trying to figure out, what is it that organizations are doing? What is going on in the marketplace? And that's one really interesting data point. But just because organizations are doing something doesn't mean that it's actually working. And this is where we have to have applied research. So on our consulting team, we run tons and tons of experiments, and we have an open source research library that any nonprofit in the world can contribute experiments to. There's about 2,400 of them. It's publicly accessible. You can look in, you can view the experiment, like this one, for example, that was done with this organization. You can see the summary, whether it was statistically significant, key learnings, all that kind of stuff. And this one actually came out of that idea. When we did that research study, we said, well, it's interesting that they're using this kind of, pre-selected social proof concept. Does that actually work? So then we actually ran this experiment with a client of ours. You can see the difference between the left and the right here, the control and the treatment. We highlighted that $50 donation that said most popular. Just by adding that one little thing to this page, we actually saw an 8% increase in conversion and a 15% increase in average gift. So if you're getting more donations that are larger on average, it means a lot more revenue. And what's interesting is when you can kind of like pull the layer back a little bit, we can see that this was really driven by an increase on mobile device. People are more likely to be coming from a social channel. Maybe they're more likely to be influenced by that kind of social nudge, that social pressure. And they're also moving quicker. So the more that we can kind of pre-select with some, justification, maybe it helps them get through the donation flow quicker. So it kind of worked for us in that example or that client, but then we've also seen it work for other organizations like the Sierra Club, who actually ran this experiment and published it. Thanks to them for publishing this on their page with Optimizely. And you can see that actually they have that arrow nudge, which they've tested their way in to see that it works. But when they use the arrow nudge to make gift monthly with this social proof factor of how many other donors have already signed up, it actually helped increase recurring donors 30%. So what we need to do is see, is this actually working? This is where experimentation and testing is really, really critical. What do people actually do? Not what do you think? Not what do I think? What is actually working? What's actually going on? And then we try to line this up with academic research. I kind of use quotes around academic research because it's not just all academics. There's a lot of people doing interesting research in the space. But we try to line up with what do we know about human behavior or donor behavior from other people doing this type of research. And in this case, Robert Cialdini wrote a book called Influence and really defined this concept of social proof, also called consensus or social influence, but it's the psychological and social phenomenon wherein people copy the actions of others in an attempt to undertake behavior in a given situation. So one of the most famous experiments that's he published, and that's in his book, that's really well known, is about the washroom, not bathroom, it's the washroom. When you go into a hotel, right, you'll see like the please reuse your towels kind of message. So the control is often something around the environment, please, save the environment and, don't hang up your towels on the back of the store. And using this kind of environmentally focused message, they found that about 35% of people will reuse their towels. So 65% of people just ignore it. But then they had this one treatment where they used this messaging on that kind of placard in the room. 75% of our guests reuse their towels at some time during their stay, so please do so as well. And they had another treatment where they said 75% of people who have stayed in this room have reused their towel. And by putting that statistic out and kind of using this idea of social influence or people like you, they saw a 26% increase in towel use in treatment 1 and a 33% increase in towel reuse in treatment 2. And that's so like, this is just one of the examples of how if we know that others are doing something, we're actually more likely to copy it. But does this relate to the nonprofit side? Well, thanks to the Science of Giving book, which is a great, great, dense book, one of the experiments in there is focused on social influence. And so a few years ago, it's 2009, they did a study with a public radio organization where they were calling people to make donations, asking for donations. And what all they did is said, the person before you gave a gift of $75, would you consider making a gift? The person before you gave $150, did you consider a gift? The person before you gave $300, would you consider a gift? Versus the control, which didn't reference any previous donation. So you can see the chart there that all the references of a previous donation, 75, 150, 300, all increased giving. But just by saying the person before you gave $300, it increased the likelihood of someone giving the amount that they gave 29%. You don't know that person. You don't even know if that's true. We are socially wired and connected beings, and knowing that someone else is doing an action and even knowing what they're doing, whether it's reusing towels or making charitable gifts and how much actually influences us, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. So this is just one example of how we're trying to combine forensic research. What are organizations doing? That's really interesting. And then applied research. Well, does this actually work? And then academic research. Does this line up with what we know about human behavior? And then the more that we can kind of triangulate these three things, the more stable or solid we think it is to kind of teach and share from. And that's really what our mission is, right? Decode what works in fundraising, make it accessible to as many nonprofits as possible. So that's kind of like where we're coming from, but also hopefully that's interesting, but also a tip. Can you use this idea of social proof or social nudges to increase your conversion rate with that most popular type of thing? Increase average gift perhaps by nudging them towards an amount that's higher than your average gift, or maybe even nudging towards a recurring gift, something that we'll talk more about. So that's really what I want to do today, is kind of based on 2019 and kind of me nerding out in the charity world, looking at research. What are some of these kind of triangulations and ideas that I think are useful for you and me and us as we look to grow online giving? So just one more kind of like word of warning. This is maybe a little more advanced. I'm not talking about the basics, so really, like, if you aren't collecting and sending emails frequently that don't always ask, and that your emails look and sound and feel more like a person, then basically, like, stop watching this and start working on that. Like, that's a gross oversimplification of what is needed for online fundraising today, but that is really, really critical. The size and quality of your email list and how well you communicate via email, generally speaking, in aggregate most of the time, is what leads to online revenue for fundraising. So just kind of like warning there, and actually I hope you don't stop watching, but this is really, really critical. Because here's the problem. When we look at things like new donor retention rates, this is from the latest Blackbaud Charitable Giving Report, look at first year online only donor retention rates, about 24%. And when we look further down the line of even donors giving through different channels, 2 years later, single gift donors, only 21% of them are around. And you can find whatever stat you want. I'm sure Keela has stats, Fundraising Effectiveness Project, almost any benchmark study, and we're working on one for small nonprofits. They all have some metric, and they all are bad for first year donor retention rates. This is a big problem, but it's not a fundraising problem, I don't think. It's a communications problem. How do we thank? How do we acknowledge? How do we communicate? How do we cultivate? What's our customer service? These are the problems that lead to these really, really low donor retention rates, generally speaking. So that's really what I want to focus these strategies in on, is how do we get better at solving that problem? Because if we can't solve that problem, we're always going to be on this treadmill where charitable giving continues to not only not grow, but we're actually having fewer people in Canada and the US giving every single year in proportion to the population. We're getting worse at fundraising, even though we have more access to data and technology. It's a communications problem. All right. So strategy number one, do better thanking. So when we did a different study last year, we became a donor to 199 nonprofits, and we found that only 15% did not acknowledge our donation at all in the first 2 days. So now you could say like 85% acknowledged, which is good, but this still means that 15% of nonprofits that we made a donation to did not acknowledge the fact that we made an online donation in 2 days, which is still way, way, way too high in the year of 2019. So I have to say this, but like, make sure your donors are being thanked for their gifts. And also, we included, even if it was an automated receipt, which isn't a great thank you, but at least it's a communication touch point. If we received some kind of confirmation or receipt, we would have counted it. So this excludes that. We got nothing from 15% of nonprofits in the first 2 days. So make sure your donors are thanked. That should be, table stakes, entry point. But how can you actually do this? Or how can you actually have a strategic thanking message? So how can you do this with the message? So Roger Craver wrote this great book on retention fundraising that clearly we haven't read enough. Otherwise, our donor retention rates would be doing better. But saying thanks is an easy win. But in it, he articulates some kind of 3 things that a thank you message should really focus on. 1, why the gift is appreciated. 2, why the gift matters. And 3, how the gift is being put to work. So a few good examples that we saw in our study once we started receiving all these emails. One on the Khan Academy on the left there. You can say it references the donation, and it's a little indirect, but it talks about how our support enables millions of people around the world. So basically how our donation helps. So they're doing it. It's not perfect. It could be better, but it's good. It's solid. And then I want to highlight this Food for the Hungry one, where in this first line of this email, thank you for your gift of $20 to Food for the Hungry. Right now, you're lifting a life out of poverty. Your generous gift is going to work immediately to help families where it's needed most. So they basically did those 3 things that Roger Craver was talking about, right? Gift appreciated, gift matters, how the gift is being put to work. In the very first sentence, like, it's not tons and tons of work. It's just highlighting these things that we know donors are looking for and can help set them up for future communications. So it's not just making sure they're acknowledged, again, table stakes, but making sure that we know in particular how their donation is being used and why it was needed, like reconfirming that fact to them. So that's kind of like, if getting a thanks is level 1, then this is kind of like level 2. Well, there's other levels that we can go. And one of the most interesting research studies that I saw from Jen Shang, Adrian Sargent, Catherine Carpenter, and Harriet Day from the Philanthropy Center over in the UK, they actually won an award at our conference. They did a lot of research into the role of thank yous and acknowledgments in charitable giving. And one of them was done with the Goodwill up in Washington. So they looked at Goodwill shoppers and who were members of kind of the rewards club. So people that frequently shopped at various Goodwills in Washington state. These shoppers received 3 different types of thank you emails over a few weeks after their purchase. And then they were sent a survey a few months afterwards to see, how did this change your behavior? How was this, interesting? How do you feel now? And so the 3 different treatments that they did for thank you, I'll kind of show you what they look like. But the first was talking about the impact the shopper's actions have on a beneficiary. So it looked like this, right? Thank you, getting sales emails. Thank you for every dollar you spend. Thank you for making roundup donations. By shopping at Goodwill, you create opportunities for Goodwill graduates like Shante. So they focus in on one person to try to articulate that kind of impact and connection between you purchasing, rounding up, giving, and Shante. And then in treatment 2, they actually make this a lot more clear. You can see the underlined changes here. Thanks to you, Shante has a new career. More than that, thanks to you, you have given. So they're making this connection even more direct of like, because you did this, Shante now has this, right? So it's very direct connection between what you did and the impact that it has. And then in the third treatment, they kept all those same things, except they added in these things. Thank you for making a difference to thousands of lives, and talking about the goodwill community and this kind of large number and sense of community. And what was interesting is when they looked at what influence did this have on subsequent shopping or giving behavior, the shopper, the one with that direct impact, was the only one that actually led to future generosity. The control in the community didn't actually lead to more giving or more shopping or more rounding up. It was really only the shopper treatment. So I think what's really interesting here is people generally care a lot more about their specific impact than about the collective. I think there's a temptation for us to think like, oh, we, the community, right? And we're part of this movement. And there could be something in that. But generally speaking, the more that it's about me and my gift and what I did, we're actually pretty narcissistic at times when it comes to our charitable giving, although we'll never tell you that, right? We'll say, oh, it's about the collective and the thousands. But then we look at behavior and it's like, you really care a lot about you specifically. But the principle here is the more that we can connect what you specifically did and your specific impact is better, even perhaps than the collective and, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands or thousands even, what it might be. So can you acknowledge the donor's specific impact, whether it's a story or a project or a fund, but say, thanks to you, this is now happening, right? How can we make that connection stronger, even at the community at large? But what's interesting is when they did that survey then to say like, well, how did this make you feel? Any communication, any of those 3 treatments, all help donors feel better about their shopping behavior, which they previously felt kind of negative. After they received these thank yous, they actually felt positive. And now they were more likely to, again, in the shopper treatment, shop and round up and give. And in the other treatments, they felt more connected to Goodwill. They felt like they were more connected to their community, all because we, in this case, they communicated the impact and thanked them in particular for what they did. So what's crazy here, we should be like, this is amazing, is our thank you communications in particular can not only influence future actions, but change how they perceive and feel about past actions by doing really good thank you. This is like awesome stuff. Or I think it's awesome stuff. But again, I'm a charity nerd. And speaking of nerd, like let's nerd out a little bit more. So some caution, like I am a, armchair economist, an adjunct professor. I'm not a full professor. I'm not a full economist. So it takes me a little while to understand these types of more advanced research studies. But Laura G., who I actually had on our podcast to help explain this to me, and Jonathan Meir looked at this concept of the altruism budget. One of the things that we're worried about in charitable giving is if someone gives today, are they just not going to give tomorrow? And normally we'll study this within an individual organization, but they were trying to look at this holistically of if they give to charity A, does that mean they're less likely to give to charity B or charity C or charity D later on? And it's a really, really difficult thing to study. And on the podcast, she's like, well, it's pretty much inconclusive. except for this one part where basically they found if you give now, it doesn't neutralize your ability to give later, right? Just because you give today doesn't mean you're less likely to give later on. And in fact, a different study over in the UK looked specifically at people who give at disasters and telethons or telethon fundraising, and said, what impact does this have if they give to a disaster? Are they more likely or less likely to give to another charity at another date? So not the same charity, another charity. And the same thing with the telethon. And again, it's complicated, very difficult to study, but here's what's really interesting, that last sentence here. Surprisingly, however, in the immediate aftermath of the appeals for a disaster or telethon, non-fundraising charities, so those that didn't ask, also saw an increase in their donations. So if I give to a disaster response charity because they asked me to respond, I was actually more likely to also give to another non-disaster related charity at all. And this kind of like blows economists' minds because it doesn't necessarily make sense or line up with what we know from kind of purchasing behavior necessarily. But if you know charitable giving and this concept of the warm glow, it lines up with a lot of what we know, that more people giving means more people giving. This is why we see charts like this. When are people most likely to make a second gift? It's pretty soon after their first one. Or when are they more likely to upgrade to a recurring gift? It's pretty soon after their first one-time donation. This likelihood to make a second gift or recurring gift is sooner than you might think. So this is why the front end of our communications is really, really critical, not just to thank, but also, is there room to move to action or upgrade gift or make a second gift within this kind of 45-day window? Because people experience the joy and benefit of giving. They're in this kind of warm glow halo. We're not entirely sure how long it lasts, but we know it definitely runs out. So there might be an opportunity to engage sooner and quicker. Now, I'm not saying, oh, you gave, great, give again. Like, we still need to do a good job of communicating, thanking, reporting, but maybe we just condense that time frame a little bit so it happens sooner instead of waiting 6 months down the line. Their lives have changed. They've maybe unsubscribed, right? How can we kind of shorten this time frame? Okay, kind of like a little sideways, venture there, but it's really, really interesting stuff. I think it's super cool. And the power and potential of what we can do communications is amazing. All right. So kind of like, where were we? Thanking. Another idea to consider is actually how to use the phone. So Penelope Burke, this is a famous study that a lot of people cite and reference. A call from a board member or a senior leader within 48 hours in her research helped increase revenue 39%, kind of downstream. So a lot of people use this as a basis for their stewardship plans, and rightfully so. But then some researchers were like, well, does this actually work? That was kind of a while ago. It was unique. Like, let's study. And so they actually looked at 700,000 thank you calls. And here's what they found: that no increase, no difference at all in revenue. And the charitable world was kind of like, what are you talking about? So here's where context and understanding the thing is really interesting. If you read the paper, they actually talk a lot about their caveats and their research methods and how it's, maybe not the most perfect, because these 700,000 calls happened 7 to 9 months after a donation. They were done by outside parties, so not staff or volunteers, and they didn't follow a really great kind of donor-centric script. So they talk about that in the research, but then when it makes its way into like the World Wide Web, here's what it looks like. Calling donors to thank them doesn't make them more likely to give again. Just this like gross oversimplification of what's really going on. So then a lot of people are just like, oh, well, let's stop calling donors. And I'm like, I just want to slap you in the face right now. That's not really what they were saying. So this is where let's kind of debunk this, look at some different data sources. I just realized that there was 2 parts to this GIF this morning: saddle up and lock and load. So Bloomerang, an organization, CRM in the States, looked at tons of data from Canada and the US and looked at the impact of calls. And the short summary is, if you received a thank you call within 90 days, you were more likely to be retained by 8 percentage points. Your second gift was 100% bigger, and you were more likely to give quicker, 203 days quicker, actually, just by receiving a thank you call within 90 days. So then you might be like, let's get on the phones. Let's call all these donors. But it's a good idea, from what I've seen based on research, to call your donors quickly to thank them for their gift. Focus on gratitude, and again, tie to impact. The message is still key. So you might be saying, like, what are you talking about phone? This is about online fundraising. And like, I don't have time. I don't have money. Well, one of the things that you might be able to do, and we use this as one of our 6 fundraising hacks, is there's this tool called Sly Broadcast. And Sly Broadcast is really, really neat. I used it a few weeks ago myself, but it allows you to basically record and upload voicemails to people that you have phone numbers for. So like, You set it up like a campaign. You upload and record your own voicemail. You upload the recipients, and you send or schedule a campaign. It shows up like a missed call. You have your real callback number, and then people can listen to that voicemail. So it's not the same as like a pure call where you get in a real conversation, but you can use kind of a more automated system to leave a voicemail. And when I use this, I actually got a few calls back and got in a few interesting conversations. And it's also something you can automate ongoing. So if you have like a CRM tool, we use HubSpot, but different CRMs that integrate with Zapier, you can do this. So after first time donation, send voicemail 1. After recurring donation, send voicemail 2. And you can set this up and it can run all year long so that they get this voicemail from you, your CEO, your donor stewardship, whoever, within 24, 48 hours. You can control that and set it up and run it. So you don't need the time and staff and resources that maybe you don't have for like a telephone program or something like that. So is there a way to automate this to save time and money while being timely? All right, so kind of do better at thanking. There's huge power in our communications. Can you thank donors personally, quickly, specifically? Can you focus on the impact of their gift and how it's already being put to work? If you call donors, make sure you do so sooner after the donation. And again, focus on that gratitude and the difference their donation makes. And is there a way to maybe automate that thank you process with voicemails or something like that? So that's thanking. That's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2, this is kind of a continuation of thanking, is really just do more cultivation. And again, when we made donations and also became an email subscriber to 199 nonprofits in a study last year and looked at almost 2,600 emails, one of the key data points that came out of the study was only 48% of nonprofits were we able to successfully sign up for email, make a donation, and get an email within 45 days. Less than half of nonprofits could we successfully do that and get a piece of communication in 45 days. And the median revenues of these organizations were $100 million. And this was just like, what is happening here? We don't know for sure what's going on. There was a lot of broken forms. There could have been some broken processes like back-end tool integrations, back-end human processes. I'll move off that gift because it's kind of like mesmerizing. But the idea here is like, we have to test our forms. Like that is absolutely basic to just make sure that someone successfully subscribes, successfully gives, and can get an email within 45 days, less than 50%. So like test your forms, sign up and giving process. We suggest you do it once a quarter. But then we looked specifically at cultivation. What did that look like as time goes on? It was interesting. We found this ratio of kind of 3 to 1.5 or 2 to 1 ratio, cultivation to solicitation, was pretty much true whether we were a donor or an email subscriber. But when we look at the kind of chart over time, on the left is subscriber and on the right is donor, you can see my crude hand drawing projection, but solicitation starts to go up and cultivation kind of starts to go down for donor. And we've seen this pattern twice now in different studies. So it appears that we kind of have like a stewardship plan or a way to kind of thank or maybe engage in the short term, or we just don't communicate very much. But as time goes on, we kind of start maybe running out of ideas of what does it mean to actually engage and cultivate donors as time goes on. So thinking beyond a month or 2 months or 3 months, what type of content can we send? And it doesn't need to be super complicated. We ran this experiment with a client of saying, well, what impact does cultivation actually have on things like engagement, donations, and revenue? And it was a pretty simple experiment. It's hard to track, but over 3 months, all they did is send 1 extra email a week. So pretty high volume, but 1 extra email a week, super plain, community manager, here's a blog post you might be interested in. 1 more of those a week, that's it. And over 3 months, what they found is an 80% increase in engagement. So opens and clicks. So engagement leads to, like, giving begets giving, engagement begets engagement. If people open and click, it helps improve your domain authority, improves deliverability, improves the likelihood of them opening and reading the next email, which clicking and engaging. And it's kind of this engagement cycle that can work for you or against you. If you don't send emails, if you send bad emails, people aren't engaged, it actually hurts you and you go down and down the other way. So sending more emails actually improved engagement. It improved donors over this time period, 8%, and increased revenue, 21%. And they actually continued it for another 3 months. And after 6 months of running this additional cultivation study or experiment, they saw a 42% increase in online revenue just by sending another email, and a 54% increase in engagement just by sending another email. So the idea here is, can you just send more cultivation only emails, not asks? Maybe don't send this huge long digest email with 23 things to do once a month. break that up into more frequent emails. Try to make it more personal and human, something that's more simple and easy for them to understand. Send increasing cultivation. There's a lot of ways to do it, but there's not just like, oh, this is a good practice. It leads to revenue and engagement. So how can we do cultivation more and better? How else can we think about cultivation? Multi-channel. Again, I know this is about online, but this is really critical because the online influences the offline and vice versa. So when we look at kind of donor cohorts or giving by channel, you look at offline only, offline people, so people who write checks with an email, online only, and then multi-channel, people who give via, say, check and online or in different channels. So it's interesting here. First, there's just offline people who will never give to you online. Just by getting an email, they were worth 84% more than those who we didn't have an email for, who didn't receive email. So again, the value of digital goes beyond just how much actually comes in online. This influences offline giving, and it influences retention as well. Those offline donors had a 13 percentage point increase in donor retention just by having an email on file. So one of the best ways to actually grow offline revenue is get and send emails to those offline people. And the success metric isn't online giving, it's actually offline giving, which is maybe counterintuitive. But again, we as humans don't live in individual channels as we go about our lives. These things blend and they merge and they're fluid. So your donors are the same way. And what's interesting too, if you look at these two charts that I mentioned, look at this big bar in each of them. Once people give online and offline, their value and their donor retention goes up even more. So then the strategy is, how do we get more multi-channel donors? And it's not just our data. Blackbaud in their recent report found this too. Look at online only, offline only, and multi-channel. For every single age demographic, multi-channel is vastly better than one single channel. So if we start cultivating in other channels, it's a way to then get donors in other channels. But specifically, if you're starting to say, okay, how do we get more multi-channel donors? I think the root is online acquisition. So for example, here's just one client, so take it with a grain of salt. This isn't in aggregate in all clients, but it's a similar pattern that we see. When you look at offline donors who become multi-channel donors over the course of a year, it was about 0.5% for this organization. What about those who give offline but had an email who became multi-channel? That was about 2.15%. And what about online donors who then gave offline? That's up to 9.32%, which is an 1,883% increase in multi-channel conversion, which makes sense. When you give online, you have to give your billing address, generally speaking. So then you have an address that you could send a postcard to or a newsletter to or something like that. Whereas when you give offline, you're relying on them to go out of their way to give you their email, but they don't have to give you their email when they give offline. So the strategy is basically, how do you acquire donors online, which is typically cheaper, quicker, and easier. I'm kind of using air quotes. Oh yeah, you can see me. Easier. But then it's you have that information, and then it is actually easier to use these types of strategies to actually convert to multi-channel. So I know that's not really cultivation. That's starting to more get into like, how do we do conversion and acquisition? But the idea here is, how can we do better communications and cultivation? Are you sending emails that don't contain asks, right? Even if you send a newsletter that's a cultivation, if there's a big donate button in there, it's hard for you as a donor to not feel like you're being asked. The general idea is, let your asks be asked and your cultivation be cultivation. Don't let those two get too blurry. Otherwise, you do neither well. Can you create this engaging content, talks about your work and impact or need, just even like blog posts that you can point people to about stories of impact, or, you know, what news related to your industry. People are desperate for content. If you produce content, that's one way to keep engagement high. Doesn't even need to be yours, right? Break up the big newsletter into 2 or 3 chunks. Use mail, phone, email, thinking about multi-channel. Don't assume that just because someone gave online that they aren't interested in giving offline, and vice versa. That's not what the data says. All right, so that's strategy on cultivation and starting to get into multi-channel. And multi-channels, it's our anchor study this year, where we're an offline donor and an online donor. And we're going to track for 3 months the different communications we get across offline, online, phone, to see how are people actually doing multi-channel communications. And we'll have more research and stuff coming out later this year. All right, next strategy, focus on recurring. This is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Because you remember this problem that I mentioned at the start, right? First time donor retention rate or single gift donors. Well, when we kind of zoom out and look at what does it look like for donor retention if people give year over year, it goes all the way up to 63%. What does it look like for recurring donors to give again? That goes up to 60%. Other data sources have recurring donor retention as high as 90%. So recurring donors give more in a year and a lot more over their lifetime because of these types of factors, right? Look at that jump, 24 to 63, 21 to 60. And if we actually chart this out, so this comes from the Donor-Centric Sustainer Summit group, a great source of information on sustainer recurring giving. Here's what single gift revenue looks like for their cohort over 6 years. And here's what recurring revenue looks like over that same 6-year period for those same organizations. When you break it out from large, medium, and small, you can see that recurring giving is actually much more beneficial and useful for medium and small organizations. If you don't have all of that infrastructure to do rapid cultivation, phone upgrades, you're not sending all kinds of trigger emails, then someone who's giving every single month and is more likely to give year over year is a lot more valuable to you than a one-time donor. So how do you do this? Well, this is a little bit facetious, but the secret to growing recurring giving is focusing on recurring giving. And again, you just like, I want to slap you in the face. But it's funny when you read these kind of benchmark reports or focus strategies on sustainers and recurring giving. That's really a key principle that comes out is like the organizations that succeed are the ones who focus on it. And that makes a lot of sense. If you don't focus on something internally, primarily, then how is it going to make its way as a priority externally? So then why would your donors ever do it? And we see that in the marketplace. We did a research study with PBS organizations. Last year, we're doing one with public radio this year. And that is one industry that is heavily, heavily, heavily focused on recurring giving. But they're also the ones who see the most success is because they're so focused on it. So again, recurring giving is hugely, hugely important, but flip over to the forensic research. What are organizations doing to encourage recurring giving, especially on their online donation pages? So what we found is that only about 74% of nonprofits use what we call the simple approach to communicate recurring giving during the one-time giving flow. So we'd go to make a one-time gift and we'd see how are they talking about recurring at all. So the vast, vast, vast majority of organizations are using this type of strategy, right? Make this a recurring gift. You've got that optional checkbox. So put yourselves in the shoes of the donor. You're visiting this website. Why would you choose that box? The only way you choose that box is if you had in mind, I want to make a recurring gift. If that's not your full motivation coming in, I don't know why you would choose that box. And even if you were thinking about making a recurring gift or a monthly gift, I don't know if this is enough to make me feel really good about what I was going to do. We found that only 7% of nonprofits had any sort of like value proposition or statement about why you should become a recurring donor. And if you remember this like nudge type strategy, that's what we would count, even though it's just one line, right? Your steady support prepares us for every challenge and lets us plan for the future. It's not a great sentence, in my opinion. It's very us-centric, and it's like, well, I don't really care about you in the future. I care about birds, but you know, something's better than nothing, and they're using that nudge tactic. Organizations would do this, where it's a little bit more of a full value prop, where your monthly donation today can protect threatened species, and they actually default you when you go to make a gift to monthly. So he said, okay, here's what some organizations are doing or not doing. Flip over to the applied research side. Does this actually work? So for this organization here in this experiment, they just added this little box. Did you know when you make a monthly gift instead of one type gift, you help the organization reach more people with the gospel, which is their mission? Just by adding this little like, did you know section around where they're making the decision, they actually saw a 48% increase in new recurring donors. So one idea is give recurring donors a reason to become a recurring donor. It could be that little nudge thing that we talked about. It could be just that extra sentence, but people are interested now more than ever to become a recurring donor. Subscription e-commerce economy is growing 100% year over year. That Donor-Centric Sustainer Summit, they're finding that first-time recurring donors are now outpacing upgraded recurring donors, meaning people are looking more than ever to become a first-time recurring donor, especially on digital. Digital first-time is growing 86% over the past 5 years. So now more than ever, there's a time to actually have these little nudges. If you remember this from Sierra Club, to actually say, hey, why don't you consider making this gift monthly? So maybe you can add that social proof nudge. Now, the one organization that I mentioned, WWF, defaulted to a recurring gift. We found that only 11% of organizations in our study defaulted to a recurring gift. But again, public media, 40%, and public radio, it's up to 60%. These organizations that are focused on are using this tactic. So you say, oh, that's interesting. And that looks something like this. So instead of kind of select your gift, make it monthly, they'll point you to a page that's very specific to monthly giving. The numbers are changed. It's all about monthly. And this is one of the strategies that Sierra Club has used to move from $200,000 to $1 million in recurring revenue over a few years. So maybe this is something that you can try. And again, it's something that we've tested for ourselves. But we found that the layout actually kind of makes a difference. So here's the control. You can see that make this donation monthly, or make this monthly recurring gift. We said, well, that's not enough. So what if we had it more front and center? So instead of you choosing one time and then maybe you make it monthly, what if we laid them out kind of side by side in this tabbed approach? So single and monthly. And then what if we took that same approach, but then defaulted to monthly instead of single? And what was interesting is the tabbed approach in each case increased overall conversion rate, so one time and recurring, 62% and 91%, more so than kind of the standard thing that you see, everywhere. So one idea is like, maybe you should have a tabbed approach just full stop in order to get more gifts. What was really interesting is when we did tabbed with monthly donations, we saw a 366% increase in recurring and no discernible difference in one-time donor conversion. So when you consider defaulting to a recurring gift, and it's something worth exploring, is there something you can do with the layout so it's maybe not a pre-checked box? Sometimes when something's pre-checked for us or it's too aggressive, we actually reject it and we don't like that. So if it's more like subtle or like, hey, maybe you could do this, we're a little bit more receptive to it. So whether it's a tabbed approach or something that's a little more subtle, maybe that's something we can do for recurring gifts. And then if you're defaulting, maybe you should have smaller donation amounts. There's a temptation to kind of start large to small, or try to say, let's start from a higher number so that we can get, higher gifts. And it's something that we've experimented or seen in the lab. In this case, they actually started with a $10 donation as opposed to a $15 donation per month. And they saw a 125% increase in recurring donors. So a huge increase in the likelihood of someone actually becoming a recurring donor. And what's interesting is no difference in average gift. So by starting with a lower amount, it's not like we lowered the amount that people were actually giving. We actually just increased the amount of people that were giving and then kept the amount that they were giving the exact same. So I think that's a really interesting thing for us to keep in mind, is actually by lowering the options, we increased giving and didn't change the average gift. And we've seen that where it go the opposite way, where it's like, well, we normally default to 15. Well, what if we just kind of like made it 19 and hopefully people don't even notice? Well, they notice. When we moved to 19, they actually decreased revenue per visitor 43%. So one idea is, when, especially with recurring, where the value is over lifetime, can you lower the amounts that you're suggesting or asking for so that you can increase recurring gift? And it may not have any difference on the average gift. So one thing to note here in these experiments that I showed you that worked, this one, you remember with the kind of like, did you know statement? This was new recurring donors. So new people visiting the website were very receptive to that type of messaging. What about returning donors? They actually decreased in this case by having that did you know. The more loyal people are, the more entrenched they are in their ways of giving. Sometimes when you throw new things at them, they're like, I've been giving to you for years. Don't tell me what to do. So in this case, it works specifically for new recurring donors. So this type of language is maybe on your acquisition side or lapsed donors or new donors, but maybe not for your loyal or returning donors. And Sierra Club found something similar, right? Where they were growing recurring giving. They found this default strategy was all channels, specific campaigns, prospects. But when they did organic search or paid search, so when people were specifically looking for Sierra Club, they actually saw a decrease in this. So again, when someone has something in their mind and you present them with something that doesn't fit, maybe there's a disconnect. So again, new people that you're driving there, this is where a default to recurring can work. But maybe if they're coming from paid search or they're more loyal donors where they maybe have more something in their mind, maybe it doesn't work as well. That's pretty nuanced and fairly advanced, something worth looking at. But when you default to recurring for new search, maybe especially if you're pushing from an ad or email, you can do that. All right, so focus on recurring giving checklist. Make it a priority for you and your team internally. If it's not a priority to you internally, it's not going to be a priority externally. And if it's not a priority, you're not going to see results. Have a reason for someone. If it's a small sentence, if it's a nudge, if it's a default with some copy, but some reason why people should do it. You can try that kind of nudge with social proof, default to recurring gift. And again, just be wary of new and return visitors, the differences between them. And can you lower that first and suggested recurring gifts? And one thing I didn't touch on, but having an EFT or direct debit option on your donation page, we've seen have no impact negative on conversion and a big increase on someone's lifetime value because it's connected to their bank account then and not their credit card. And then again, just keep in mind the differences between new visitors and return visitors. All right, still cruising here. 2 more strategies to go. One that takes a little bit of time and then one will be real quick. So the strategy of small actions lead to big actions. You've actually seen some examples of this in ways and maybe you didn't really notice. But when we talk about online giving, the analogy that we use is a donor mountain. and optimizing each and every step of the donor's journey, kind of up the mountain. You don't just get one big yes, I want to give, or no, I don't want to give. It's actually a series of little yeses. Open the email, click the email, read the email, get to the landing page, read the landing page. How much do I give? Is my amount secure? There's all these little decisions along the way. And your job is to get a bunch of little yeses. And there's this concept of cognitive momentum is we just need to get people moving in the right direction. And then it's kind of like inertia. An object in motion is more likely to stay in motion. It's the same way with how we make decisions and even purchase things. So one of the hardest things is actually getting people started. So this is where we see like Facebook ads for a direct ask, like, please give to our organization, go straight to a donation page, 0% conversion rate in this case. And then you just like, you're so sad and you're like, oh, no one wants to give. And then they said, well, what if we actually just like offered them something first? So here's like an ebook or something like that. So then you did add to ebook. And then after they downloaded the ebook, now there was a donation ask. Thank you so much for downloading this. It's on its way. While you're here, did you know we're only able to offer this resource to you and like you because of your support? Would you consider a $50 donation? That kind of thing. They saw a 1.18% increase, 1.18% conversion rate. So when you compare these approach like give now versus get something free and then give, it's an infinity increase in revenue for this experiment, an infinity increase in conversion rate, an infinity increase in average gift. And you're like, jackpot, did it. Right, so this is actually the model that we use for acquisition. Isn't direct donor acquisition. It's actually create some offer, advertise to it, or drive traffic to it, to a specific opt-in page for your ebook, petition, etc., and then move right away to this instant donation page, ask. But this idea, whether you use that model or not, is acquiring emails first as a route to acquiring donors is something to think about. Or even once you have the email, instead of asking directly, could you ask for a small action first? So this was a disaster response from an organization in the States. You can see on the left, they have give now, and on the right, they say, I will pray. But again, substitute whatever language, sign this petition, whether it's prayer or not, the idea is it's a non-financial ask. And so if you click give, then you would go on to make a donation. If you clicked pray, then you could fill out this little box to say, yes, I pledge to pray. And after you confirmed, then you were actually asked, you're right. So thank you for praying. Then you were saying, hey, while you're here, would you consider making a gift? Because, prayers alone don't actually help these people, kind of messaging. And they saw a 30% increase in donations by adding in that step to pray first. And again, it's saying, are people ready to give? But pray? Sure. Yeah, I could pray. You know what? Yeah, you're right. I should give, right? It's this idea of laddering actions and small actions leading to big actions. That type of strategy we use all the time now. Instead of asking for a donation in a welcome series, we'll actually offer an ebook and then ask for a donation. It's this idea of kind of, again, small actions lead to big actions, and how do you get someone started? This example from Sierra Club that I showed you earlier, this is actually after you sign a petition page, right? Thank you for taking action. After you sign a petition around, the caribou or the environment, they say, thank you for taking action. Then they go into their offer about why you should become a recurring gift. So maybe you can do a small action and then kind of lead into that default recurring gift page. And it's not just our actions, it's how we think about things as well. So this experiment, right, this is again, recurring donor, make my donation recurring. You got that checkbox versus they had this pop-up that would come up right before you clicked donate. Sorry, after you click donate, say, hey, before we process your gift, would you consider something? Goes into the reasons for making a monthly gift. And then yes, convert my gift to $15. They saw a 64% increase in recurring gifts. And again, no significant impact on one-time giving. Because sometimes if you tell someone who's not thinking about recurring, and again, more and more people are, they go, giving every month, no. But in this case, yeah, I'll give one time. And then after they get into the sequence, all their payment information's in there. With one click, they can convert it to a recurring gift. And it's like, yeah, you know what, I'll actually do that. Or same concept for these smaller amounts. You want that small nod, that small yes that leads to the big yes by lowering amounts, engaging people, and then getting them to where you want them to go. So like, what are nonprofits doing? Well, not a lot, to be honest. 61% of nonprofits or charities in Canada, when we did a study, had no confirmation page after email sign up, and only 22% had any kind of call to action. So again, like table stakes, have a confirmation or thank you page. It helps for a few different reasons. But then we also looked in the States here, 60% of nonprofits offered us nothing to do after we signed up for email. It was like, well, big gulps. See you later. Like, I'm here. I just signed up for your stuff. I'm engaged. Give me something to do, anything to do. They had nothing to do. The other benefit of having these confirmation pages is tracking. If you're wanting to run tests, if you're wanting to understand where are people coming from or what are they engaging with, you're going to need to set up goals. And one of the easiest ways to do that is through destination goals in Google Analytics, where you need a thank you or a confirmation page. So then it allows you to actually see, oh, where are people coming from? Where are they engaging? And if you want to run an experiment on Google Optimize, which is free, you're going to have the goal set up. So it's really critical for the tracking side of things too. If you're like, oh, I don't know anything about Google Analytics, we actually just launched this course yesterday, Google Analytics for Nonprofits, and it's pretty in depth. It's really good. We hired Chris Mercer from Measurement Marketing IO. He's a Google Analytics expert to teach it with and for us. So if you're interested in more training, that's something worth looking at. But is there a way that we can structure these actions? And again, like, this is a little bit nerdy, this is a little bit advanced, but I think it's pretty cool. I was on a panel with this guy here named Mike Norton, who's a Harvard business professor. And one of the things he talked about that I thought was really interesting was pseudo set framing. So pseudo set framing sounds really cool and crazy because academics like to make things really complicated, but it's just this idea of that there's a set of things that are arbitrarily created for the sole purpose of creating wholeness. And so then they did some research of really, we as humans like to complete things. You know, it's like if you make a to-do list, you want to complete that to-do list. So they actually applied the same methodology to online giving with the Canadian Red Cross and said, here's, you know, idea number one, you've got these 6 options. You can choose one to make a cash donation. Here's option 2, here's these 6 different things. And as you add those things to kind of your cart, it would put in a little pin of kind of where you're helping things around the world. And then the pseudo set option, it actually made them a set. So it kind of encouraged you to choose all 6. And as you did, that globe on the right would actually complete. So it's kind of like the more that you add, the closer you got to completing the whole set. So then when they looked at this experiment, they said like, how many people actually chose all 6, which was then a lot more revenue. They found that only 3% chose all 6 in the cash, 5% chose all 6 in the gifts, and 21% of people chose all 6 when it was kind of structured and framed as a set. So, you know, that's a lot of extra revenue for people using this idea of pseudo set to get them to complete this set. So is that something you could do maybe in a donation page or an action page, or maybe on a confirmation page after they've signed a petition? You could say, hey, here's 2 more things you could do to be a champion. You know, make a gift here and share this with friends, or, you know, any type of laddering of actions. If we can position that in a set, maybe people are more likely to actually complete those things. It's really interesting. So use small actions to lead to bigger actions. Focus on getting possible donors to say yes, either in their actions or in their minds, to keep that cognitive momentum going. Consider a secondary action, pledge, email, reminder, survey, etc., for less motivated donors to get an email or a small commitment, and then you can use email or ladder them to a next commitment. For donor acquisition, consider acquiring email signups through content offers, move them to an instant donation ask, maybe even a default recurring ask. Having an instant upgrade or additional gift on your donation thank you page, something I didn't talk about, but we've seen anywhere from 5 to 20% of people will make an additional one-time gift immediately after making a one-time gift. After they're thanked, here's how your donation will be used. Would you consider making a gift to another project, another person, or another fund? Pretty interesting stuff. And then offer some action on your email sign up. Again, something is better than nothing. And is there a way to present these additional actions as a set to be completed? So some of that's maybe a little bit more advanced, but again, trying to understand what's working, what are nonprofits doing or not doing in this case, what seems to be working, laddering actions, and what do we see in kind of academic research that, yeah, the more that we can present actions even in a set or towards progress, people are more likely to do them. And then last kind of strategy that kind of applies to a lot of this concepts is to really focus on boomers. I know it's like not sexy, you know, to talk about focusing on boomers, because like, who wants to target this guy, right? That's my dad. I hope you're not laughing. But when we look at boomers, they command a huge amount of revenue in the charitable giving space, 43% in the US, 41% in Canada. It's interesting how much Canada, US demographic giving data is actually pretty similar. And then again, it's not just how much they give, but, you know, mentioned this multi-channel study or statistic earlier. Well, look at that online. 75 plus have the highest online only donor retention rate from any age. So they're actually the highest giving segment is 65 plus when you actually, in aggregate, in general, most of the time, again, not everyone, when you actually break it down, which sounds crazy, but like I ran into some of these stats, was like, this can't be true. This seems crazy. But if you actually pull data, and we looked at $20 million of donations, 65 plus accounted for 47% of transactions, not revenue, transactions, number of gifts. And so when you add in boomers or 55 plus, 72% of all online transactions in this benchmark came from boomers and up, giving online. So again, like thinking that online's only for kids or something like that isn't true. And yet only 5 to 10% of all advertising dollars is really spent on boomers. So it's like a high online giving segment that few people are targeting. And again, who wants to market to this guy? But it's a real opportunity. So like, how can you do that? Obviously targeting paid advertising specifically to age demographics, optimizing email timing and ads for desktop. Desktop converts still at about 3 times higher than mobile, particularly for boomers. So if you're targeting them, make sure you send emails when they're likely to be at a desktop, or serve ads only on a desktop. And then these are like general best giving practices, but I think they're accentuated for boomers, like bigger form fields, easier to complete, more white space, fewer steps, less design, less crazy stuff flashing at them, and an increased focus on security and trustworthiness. These are some things that I think boomers are evaluating and looking for even more when it comes to their online giving experience. So those are kind of 5 different online strategies that, they're not the strategies, but they're things to focus on based on some research that I've seen. Do better thanking, do more cultivation, focus on recurring giving, use small actions to lead to bigger actions, and focus on boomers. So we're going to have some time for questions. And as you get those in, please chat them in. We're going to do that. I do want to just highlight something that we're working on is through our aggregate inbox, we're starting to analyze now the past year, or this whole year, of email volume, and looking specifically at how has COVID changed the email volume for organizations. And we see that it's kind of going up. And then the total percent of messages that are mentioning COVID, you can see goes starting to go way up. So we're analyzing this data. We're going to actually show examples of data and try to break down cultivation versus solicitation. So we will have more research and resources coming out of saying, well, what are organizations doing related to COVID? So that could be interesting to you. But if you're interested in any of this stuff, the best way to visit is nextafter.com/institute. We got all our research and resources and training and stuff. I highlighted a few courses. If you're looking to kind of do some more online training now or in the future, you can check out all those different courses. We're doing a Learn from Home campaign right now. So you get 1 free course of whatever you want right now using that code Learn from Home Try. Get any course if you're choosing. And if you want to binge them, it's not as cool as Netflix, but if you want to take more courses, you can do Learn from Home Join and you get 50% off membership. All courses whenever you want. And we'll give you this book, The New Nonprofit, which is really interesting and one of my favorite books of the past year. So that's enough sales things. I did mention the podcast. A lot of these researchers, I get them on the podcast so they can explain this stuff to me in ways that make sense. But if you're looking for things to listen to and interested in conversations around giving and generosity, you can check out our podcast, Generosity Freak Show. All right, so questions and discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Brady. We've got time for a quick style question round. So we'll start with Patty Breach. What do you mean by offline donors?
People who give via check, primarily. That's generally who an offline donor is.
The next one's from Glenna Frey. How do you get emails from Facebook donors?
So one, when I'm talking about using Facebook as a means to acquire donors and emails, I'm saying create a landing page on your website where you say, get this ebook, get this course, sign this petition, and then you show ads on Facebook to point to your landing page. So you're using Facebook to get them to your website. That's how you acquire their email. I'm not talking about people giving online to Facebook. That's growing like crazy. Facebook fundraised over $3 billion, but you don't control the experience. And a lot of times you don't get the email and information. So it's not saying that's not worthwhile, but what I'm talking about is using Facebook ads to drive to your website to acquire an email, which is slightly different.
Great. So the next question from Chris. I'm a communicator at a small nonprofit, and this gives me a lot to think about. However, I'm struggling with what content to create and include in our cultivation emails in the current climate. Do you have any recommendations on what content I should focus on over the next few months?
Yeah, I think, again, maybe 2 or 3 things. One, something is better than nothing, generally speaking. If you're trying to provide value and you're trying to come up with things that are useful to them, if it's going to be perfect, no, but communicating is better than non-communicating, generally speaking. 2, it doesn't have to be your content. Like we're sharing that Heartsook letter because I didn't write it. I'm not that smart, don't have that much experience, but I think it's great and useful. So you can point to other people's stuff that, you or other people are finding useful. It doesn't always have to be your thing. The email and cultivation is about how do you build engagement, connection, trust, and how do you offer value? So that doesn't have to be your own content. And then 2, you probably have a lot of these content things. If you do conference calls with board members, if you do internal presentations, if you get emails from program staff, like there's probably a lot of content that just circulates your organization that you haven't really thought of making it more external. So some of it is just unearthing stuff that you already do, already have, or already say, and kind of putting it on in like a blog format or something that's more accessible.
The next question comes from an anonymous attendee. Great presentation, but when you say don't ask in cultivation emails, do you mean not having the donate button at all, or having the donate button but just sharing content and not focusing on the ask?
I mean not having the donate button at all. So again, this is my opinion. This is what I suggest. Because again, donors feel like they're being asked all the time. And part of the reason is that we're subtly asking them all the time. So if you're sending a thank you email, or it's often in our template, right? Here's an update from the field or COVID response. And you're not really asking for them to give because of COVID. But if there's a huge donate button anywhere in that email, top right, bottom of the footer, it's really, really hard for the average donor to not feel like they're being asked to give. And the problem is if they say no, and then you actually make a strong ask where you do want them to give, they've already said no, they feel like you're asking again. So the general principle is, what's the one purpose of this email? Create that email for that one purpose, and then send another email with its totally separate purpose. This kind of Frankenstein email where we're thanking, we're cultivating, we're asking, we're informing, all in one email is, generally speaking, not a good approach.
Okay, so the next question is from Kyle. When you default to a monthly giving in your donation forms, is there data about their drop-off rate in the first few months?
I don't have that data, no. But like I said, the recurring gift data retention would still apply. So whether it's a default or not, that would be interesting to parse out. If someone chose to be a recurring gift versus defaulted into recurring, what is their lifetime value or retention? I haven't seen that information anywheres. But I don't think that would be a reason to not do it. And again, we're using pretty generous projections, normally around like a 2-year retention, and monthly donors are often stick around longer than that. So check it out for yourself, but I don't think that's a reason to not default to recurring, or not try it at least.
The next question comes from the chat from Melissa. When targeting recent grads as new donors, so alumni of our program, are they just as likely to become recurring donors if we keep the ask low? Example, $5 a month, in spite of potentially being income limited?
I mean, I don't know for sure, but that would be more of my approach. Yes. I know in higher ed, it's like, how many of your alumni are giving, and there's these kind of other weird, metrics that you do. We're actually doing a higher ed study right now as well. So we're getting into higher ed. But I think a $5 a month gift, or especially for young alumni, even like a $3 a month gift type of ask or offer, I think would be very appealing and relevant to a lot of alums.
Our next question from Beth. What gift processing sites allow for such customization? Our current processor offers nothing like this.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of this is problematic, is we're hamstrung by tools and technology. So those examples that I was showing you there were on Raise Donors, and that's actually one of the tools that one of the few tools that we'll recommend. It's flexible. You'd still need to know some kind of code, but out of the box, it's good, and it's also quite flexible and allows for testing, and integrates with others. Those things that we look for. Most of the time, no matter what tool you do, Keela's got a good donation tool as well, but you're going to need some element of code to customize it, and that's just kind of the way the world is. The default tools need to be better, but there's always going to have to be skills like coding and development if you really want to do more unique, cool things.
This one comes from Sonia. Any chance we could see the slide again that lists the best ways to target boomers effectively?
Sure. And again, these are just some kind of like ideas that like we use, that I would use. Oh, that's not it. This one. And again, the targeting for desktop, I think if you've got a limited ad spend budget, that applies to everyone, because whether you're old or young, all of us convert higher charitable giving on a desktop versus a mobile, but particularly so for boomers. So targeting by age, if you set up Facebook ads or search ads, you can target, age range, retargeting. So if you want to target returned visitors, but again, just set the age parameter to be, slightly older people. And then some of those online giving experiences, those are really kind of just like best practices, but again, they're just more accentuated for older donors.
All right, so we've got our last 3 questions. This one's from Vimy. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Do you have any recommendations for online fundraising platforms that can be incorporated into a website?
Yeah, the one I mentioned, Raise Donors, again, is a pretty good, flexible donation tool that's not super expensive. That's one of the few that we'll kind of recommend. But no one tool is going to solve all your problems. I mean, most donation tools are just a form. So what happens above the form? What kind of message or offer do you have? How do you set the gift array? That's up to you. You know, there's still a lot of things that you could do regardless of the tool. So the things to look for in a tool, I think, are how flexible is it? How well does it play nicely with others? And what's the front end user experience? Those are things to look for. And then you're always going to have to find ways to hack and customize, no matter how good a tool is.
Second to last question is from Patty. Is there a way for your donation page to recognize a returning donor versus a new donor and show them different content? Or do you recommend creating a separate returning donor page for emails sent to existing donors?
Yeah, so there is a way, but that gets even more technically advanced. So that would be more of the approach that we would have, is creating like a repeat donor segment or a returning user segment and just pointing them to a different page that's either has, none of that messaging around recurring. Often we'll see for repeat donors or loyal donors, not having a gift array at all can help. Again, like trying to predict how generous someone is based on past giving is still pretty complicated. So just sometimes saying an open field and backing away is even best. So even if you could do those splits of like, this is what first time people see, and again, 70 to 80% of your website traffic is probably new people. So that's how you can cater to them. But then when you send emails, that's where you can do repeat donors, return visitor segments, or even ads. If you're doing retargeting ads to someone who's visited your site, then you know that they visited your site before and you can show them a different page. So those are easier ways to do that, as opposed to like dynamic content based on user behavior, which is pretty advanced.
Thank you. And so our last question, what are some of the best platforms for creating those donation pages? The one with the globe and tabs looks super cool, but how to build them out?
Yeah, the globe and tab ones we didn't build. I'm sure that was like hand coded or customized. And again, there's like pretty much 3 components to any donation flow or form. There's the copy, the message, and the offer, which almost is entirely in your control. There's the form, the thing that actually like processes the gift, and that's often not in your control. And then how the information gets put into that form is where sometimes you have some customization. So, sometimes we'll create kind of cool things of like, hey, choose these 3 things, and here's the globe. And then when they click donate, it still actually passes into the form. You can pass through parameters and information. So there's ways to maybe do cool things that lead into a form without actually changing your form. So that's something worth looking into with your current tool. But a lot of this type of stuff, again, none of it really comes like that out of the box. You're going to have to find a way to either customize the whole thing or customize the entry point into the donation form.
All right, thank you, Brady. That concludes this session. Thank you all so much for the thoughtful questions and learning today. I don't know about everyone else, but I found that session to be pretty stellar. So thanks again. This is just a reminder that our next session will start in about 20 minutes at 10:30 a.m. PST or 1:30 p.m. EST. This session will be led by Mobilize America's Annie Llewellyn and No Vets Alone Renata Sahagian, and they will be presenting a session titled When Volunteers Don't and Can't Show Up in Person, How to Fill the Gaps. If you haven't already registered for that, we've posted the link in the comment sections to sign up. So thank you again to everyone, and we'll see you soon.